Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are continuing to walk through the life of Peter. But at this point, we are basically just hours away from the crucifixion of Jesus, and so we're really just going to see how Peter responds to everything that's going on. And today we are going to be looking at how does Peter respond to the Garden of Gethsemane and the prayers of Jesus and everything that goes on in the garden. That is all preparation for the moment of his arrest, which we will see his response to Jesus' arrest on Thursday. But today we are going to really just kind of dive into what did Jesus mean when he was talking about temptation and the disciples not entering into temptation, as we'll see today. What does that exactly mean, and what can we kind of learn from that? And so we will unpack that today. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 46. And then in Mark chapter 14, we're going to be in verses 32 through 42. They are very, very similar, though. So we're just going to read them just basically one after the other, back to back. But let's start in Matthew 26, verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "So, could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So, leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the third time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." All right, so that is Matthew chapter 26. Now, before we dive into the passage and break it down, I do want to read Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. There is a lot of similarities there, so I just want to read it back to back. But Peter is mentioned by name here, whereas in Luke, it's more like Jesus is talking to the disciples as a group, which is still very true here, even if it's at first just Peter, James, and John, who are, of course, the James and John are the sons of Zebedee mentioned by Matthew. But Mark chapter 14, verses 32 through 42. And they went to a place called Gethsemane. And he, being Jesus, said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter and James and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." Going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping, and he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the third time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour has come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." All right, so with these two passages, you have the Garden of Gethsemane, as we find out from the Gospel of John. It is in John 18. Is a very, very popular place for Jesus and his disciples to go and spend time around this area. And so that's kind of one of the ways that Judas Iscariot knows where Jesus is going to be at in order to arrest him. Now, so you have them here in this garden, and Jesus is praying. We've already kind of looked at this and maybe another Broadman word about why Jesus needs to pray. Again, he's setting an example about what it means to pray, but also, again, Jesus is 100% man, and knowing exactly what he is about to go through with the crucifixion, he wants to be encouraged. And so he is seeking encouragement, endurance, perseverance to get through what is about to happen. He is looking for that through prayer. I think that's really, really interesting and really cool to see, knowing that he is going through just a lot of emotions. His soul is very sorrowful, even to death. In verse 38 of Matthew 26, Jesus began to be sorrowful and troubled in verse 37 of Matthew 26. And I think, again, that's so important to see with Jesus because, yes, Jesus is God, but he is also man. And so for him to be sorrowful and troubled, it's actually for you and I, it's incredible encouragement because the next time that I become depressed or sorrowful or troubled about what I'm going through in life, I can go, you want Jesus felt this way. He felt sorrowful. He felt troubled. And I think that's a great encouragement because then I can go to prayer and be like, Jesus, you know exactly what it means to feel sorrowful and troubled. I'm not saying that my issues are the same as what Jesus went through. Not claiming that at all. But I think that's incredibly encouraging to know. Um, Now, again, this is not the point here, but when we're talking about the cup in Matthew 26, verse 39, and then in Mark 14, verse 36, when we're talking about that cup, it's meant to be very vague. However, I do think we're probably talking about the cup of God's wrath, which is then later mentioned in the book of Revelation. So I think that is kind of an interesting tidbit. But you have the mention of Peter with James and John, that inner circle that we looked at with like the transfiguration. And so they are, let's say Jesus is in the center of this garden, and then you have on the outskirts of that center, you have Peter, James, and John keeping watch and supposed to be praying with him. And then you have the other disciples, maybe a little bit further away, and they're supposed to be keeping watch and praying with Jesus as well. Instead, the three disciples, Peter, James, and John, as we see in the Gospel of Luke as well, the other disciples are all asleep. They're all asleep. Now, again, not to gang up on the disciples here. Everything that they are going through right now, again, you had just had this massive proclamation from Jesus that somebody amongst their midst is going to betray Jesus. I mean, that is a huge bombshell to drop on them. Then you have just the fact of Peter just trying to mull over the fact that Jesus is foretold that he is going to deny Jesus 3 times. There's a lot of emotions going on. And then, of course, you have everything else with Passover week, Jesus foretelling his death and his resurrection. I mean, it's just, there are so many things going on. I understand why they are very, their eyes are very heavy, as verse 43 says. I understand that completely. And most likely, Yes, there's not an exact time frame, like it says at 11:55 p.m., but most likely this is probably very late in the evening, if not around like midnight or maybe after midnight, when all of this happens in the Garden of Gethsemane. So, all those factors together, I understand why their eyes are heavy. But then Jesus makes this comment in verse 41 of Matthew chapter 26. Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation, which is then repeated in Mark chapter 14, verse 38. Now, when we're looking at this, what is he talking about with temptation? Is it the temptation to sleep? I don't think so here. It would seem odd to me that Jesus is labeling sleep as temptation. Now, could it be that he is talking about this in a way that they are showing a lack of care for Jesus because they're not praying with him? They're not showing a unity with Jesus of praying with him. I think that's more likely. I don't think it's just because they fell asleep and the temptation to fall asleep. Because he says, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. So for me, I think it's more talking about the temptation about fleeing from the Garden of Gethsemane, which of course they all do. So, of course, as we'll see later on, John and Peter do show up at the trial of Jesus, but everybody does flee from the Garden of Gethsemane. So, I think for me, the temptation that he is talking about is he is trying his best to make sure that they are not going to give in to fear and to run away because their spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So, do I think it's just because they fell asleep and he doesn't want them to sleep? I don't think so. I think it may be a little bit more plausible that it could be talking about a lack of unity because they're not praying for Jesus. Absolutely, I think that's on the table. But for me, I think it's more that he is predicting basically that they are going to be faced with this really hard decision about what to do when Jesus gets arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane and they all choose to flee from him. So we will get to that though very, very soon. But I think for me, that's what the word temptation means and what is really going on there. And for us, I think that's a really, really interesting thing. Knowing that Jesus is praying for us, knowing that he is absolutely watching over us. It is a great encouragement and it's a great reminder that even when we are facing temptations, we have our Savior watching over us. And sometimes we'll flee. Sometimes the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak, and we will fall, we will sin. But sometimes the spirit indeed is willing, and the flesh is strong. But basically, what I'm trying to get at is that Jesus absolutely can give you and does give you the strength that you can have to say no to temptation. But that doesn't mean that it'll be easy to do that. But he absolutely is right there for you. And so hopefully you will, yeah, hopefully, even though your spirit indeed is willing, hopefully that you will be encouraged by the fact that your Savior is right there for you to help you get through those times of temptation. Now, with that being said, now we get to a really interesting part in the life of Peter, and that's really his response to the rest of Jesus, which is a very, very interesting moment. So we will get to that on Thursday, but thank you for spending a little bit of time with me today as we saw kind of Peter's reaction to the prayer of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today. I'll see you on Thursday. Thanks.